In this video, we're talking about the World Barista Championship in Athens. Welcome, my name is Patrik and this is Coffee with April. For this video, we're going to discuss the World Barista Championship. This video goes live today, which should be a Friday, which should mean, if I play my cards right, that I'm in the semifinal of the World Barista Championship. Let's see what happens. Now, last year when I competed in Melbourne, I did a similar video where I was kind of sharing a little bit about my competition ideas, a little bit about what was kind of gonna happen in Melbourne, right? And if you want more kind of in-depth views into how I deal with competitions, that's a good kind of video to start with, right? This video will be very focused on what is happening in Athens, why am I doing what I'm doing, am I bringing anything new to the table? Predictions, you never know with these kind of competitions. The focus I have going in is obviously being better than what I was last year. And then it's up to the judges to decide where that's going to put me in terms of the total ranking, right? But the effort, the choice of coffee, the presentation, all of this is kind of designed for me to move forward, right? So I don't believe from a competition perspective that you should go in and do the same thing every single year, right? Competition is about progress, it's about challenging yourself. It's about discovering new things. When I competed in Melbourne, I was very focused on varietals. That was the key thing. I wanted to make people excited. We played a little bit of a game together, which was interesting and served me well to some degree. Obviously, there were some challenges there with acidity, light body, equipment, and so on and so on. All the kind of usual thing that every single competitor is up against, right? Because we're all really in the same boat, which is something we shouldn't forget in these kind of processes, right? And it's always, regardless of result, a very valuable thing to do, a very fun thing to do. I feel this year moving into Athens is a little bit more deliberate for me. Melbourne was a little bit of a last minute thing where I wasn't sure I was doing barista. Barista didn't happen. I jumped into the barista and then all of a sudden I was in Melbourne. Now I had a little bit more thought behind it. I had a little bit more time to structure what I wanted to do, which feels really interesting, right? So what I'm actually doing here in Athens is I'm discussing fermentations. So I'm basically doing a 180 on the varietal conversation last year where I didn't really talk about fermentations to moving more into the world of fermentations. Not only fermentations, because we all know that there's a lot more to it, but it's an interesting, polarizing conversation to have where the industry has been in a change over the last few years where I really can't think of anything other than fermentations that had so much impact, both good and bad, on overall quality, right? And that's really what I'm trying to talk about here in Athens, right? So it's about discussing it, it's about showing different perspectives on it, and it's about taking a decision as part of an industry where you kind of stand with it, right? So I think that's really interesting, and I'm looking forward to bring that kind of part to the table. If you've seen this video, you've probably seen me competing already, which means you know which coffee I'm using. I'm going to use a geisha varietal again, which a lot of people still argue you cannot win the World Barista Championship with a geisha varietal, which, to be fair, statistically is probably true. We've seen over the last years that most vineyards have used Sidra or something other, let's say Bourbons, not completely sure, but definitely not geisha. Geisha has been there in the final, but it hasn't really been winning, right? And I think especially that's a reflection on Melbourne last year, where we saw very different coffees or very kind of un-geisha-like coffees in that very top, right? But in the end of the day, it's about bringing the coffee that you want to bring and the flavors that you want to showcase, right? Full transparency, moving into this year, I had another farm in mind. I had another coffee in mind, also a geisha varietal. And I visited a farm in February in Guatemala with the idea of actually picking the competition coffee, which to some extent I did. That coffee arrived a few months later, very close to competition, and it just wasn't tasting where I needed it to taste, right? So with that, I changed a little bit course on the presentation, and I ended up back with the same coffee, new picking, but same lot of coffee that I used for the national championship, which is basically a red geisha from the La Negrita farm in the Tolima region of Colombia. So Mauricio's coffees are not new to the competition in any shape or form. Last year, I believe Sidra made it top 3, right? So really good coffees. And I'm still one of those that's going to say that an acidic espresso, if it's a well-integrated tasty acidity is always going to be better than one without acidity, right? Then there's always this discussion about low body versus high body. Long story short, I'm just going to do my style of espresso, right? Because that is what it comes down to in these kind of competitions. It's all about representing what do you stand for and what do you actually want to bring to that stage, right? Now, there is a few changes in the rules that I think are interesting. I think it's more relevant maybe in the Brewers Cup, where the structure of the competition has changed and the score sheet has changed quite significantly by introducing sweetness. And if you look at Barista, it really hasn't changed so much. Basically what they've done is that they seem to have kind of flipped the game in terms of taste descriptors versus taste experience. So basically they're awarding more points to the judge's taste experience rather than the competitor's ability to describe what the judges will taste, right? So it's still a factor, but not as big of a factor as it was before, which in one hand is kind of a good thing, because that means that it's really more about what that experience is, right? And taste is always going to be subjective to some point and difficult with a very wide range of different judges from all over the world, right? Now, another thing they've done is that they've taken away the 0.5 point on the scale. So that basically, in theory, should mean that either we're going to see a bit more conservative scores or we're actually going to see really, really high scores. So I'm kind of predicting that that top 6 is going to have a significantly higher score than the rest of them, just because you can't kind of safeguard with a 4.5. And keep in mind that most of these scores are still multipliers, which means that the difference between a 4 or a 5 is very big, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of comes into play. Obviously, we see alternative milk happening. So basically, oat milk is up for grabs. And I'm sure other styles of milk also, I don't really know. I'm going to bring a cow milk just because I think that's tastiest and that is what I drink when I drink any kind of milk beverage. Now, it remains to be seen. I don't believe I've heard about national competitions where someone have won with alternative milk yet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't heard about it. And I think we're all kind of curious to see what comes out of it. Like, I tried a few freeze distilled oat milks in the past here and now, and it just doesn't taste so good. So it's hard to see how that kind of alternative milk will translate into the score sheet. But we all, it's relevant. It's good that it's included. And I'm really excited to see if there's a competitor that kind of, can pull off something really interesting with that, right? So that just remains to be seen. Now, apart from that, presentation-wise, again, I'm changing the structure quite a lot. We're not going to play a game. I'm using a new setup, so using a new variations of the same cups. Using a different milk strategy, using a different signature beverage. So all in all, this is going to be quite a different presentation from what you've seen from me before. It's going to be a little bit more composed. It's going to be a little bit more straightforward. So I'm really excited to see what that will take me in the competition. And as always, we're trying to gather a little bit of material, footage, video, all of this. I will see personally if I can have a little bit of a chat with different competitors backstage as well and see if we can do anything with that, right? And I think every single year it's very interesting to see who is actually winning these coffees, right? Winning these competitions. What coffees are winning? What competitors are winning? What are they doing and not doing, right? I think looking both from the inside and from the outside, what we can see in some kind of consensus is that what really seems to set stuff apart is really those basics, right? If you have the tastiest espresso, you're most likely going to win, right? If you're able to have a good workflow, you're most likely going to win. So there's a lot of those things that kind of goes into it. But as always, competition is where I look for any kind of innovation. I think that's where we see the most of it. So it's really exciting. I'm looking forward to, one, compete myself, but also to see all of the other competitors be there live on stage, right? So with that, we just want to say thank you for watching as always. And if you have any comments on competitions or whatsoever, what's happening in Athens, you feel free to just comment below here. Again, hopefully I'm in the semifinal today, and then you guys will see me tomorrow, who knows. But I'm definitely going to go in there and answer to some of those comments. So make sure you tune in, subscribe, like, dislike, whatever, just do it. It's always helpful. And if you want to see those behind the scenes footage, then go into Patreon, right? So with that, just thank you for watching and have a good day. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.